Thank you everyone for coming. As you can see, we're going to talk about doing some fun character stuff in Houdini, which is my favorite thing to do, and a couple other extra fun things. So let's dive in. So my name's Christopher Rutledge. This is a rendering of me, not a video, if you can't tell. But you can call me Chris. And if you were here last year, I also did a talk for Side Effects, and you may remember me or maybe not. But real quick, I'll just sort of recap. I sort of went through like kind of all of my sort of explorations with Houdini, sort of post transitioning to it as like my full-time DCC that I use for everything, especially for character stuff, including character animation, rigging, literally everything I do all in Houdini now. I used to use a combination of different softwares, but now I'm fully all in on Houdini. And I talked about sort of all these different projects and a handful of other ones. And it was pretty kind of comprehensive. So I went over a lot of stuff. And then this past year, you know, I worked on some more stuff, and they asked me to do another talk. And the talk is online if you want to see it on Houdini's YouTube page. But anyway, so, you know, what have I been up to since then? And the answer is a lot of stuff that I can't talk about. But when I was making this presentation, I realized there's actually a lot of other cool stuff that I have been doing that I can talk about, and experiments and things like that. I've been learning a lot of new stuff, namely Solaris and Karma and USD, and also been doing some more like color grading and stuff like that on my renders and DaVinci Resolve, which has been nice, but mainly more Houdini stuff. And the main project that I worked on this past year was a big TV pilot project that I was hoping would be out by now, but it's not out quite yet, but hopefully we'll all be able to see it soon. It was really ambitious. It was a 22-minute pilot that was done almost entirely in Houdini, with lots of motion capture and rendered in Houdini. And this was my first time diving into Solaris, which was very daunting. I learned a lot of stuff very quickly. So I can't talk about that project, but I can talk about some of the other fun commercial projects that I've done since then, including this one behind me, or behind the logo of my studio, Grin Machine, who I'm kind of doing all my projects with. Which is a very small studio that I run with two other friends based out of LA. After this TV pilot project, when we were starting it, we were like a little bit, Karma was still, XPU was still in beta, and we didn't have like a big CPU farm. We were rendering everything out of my house for it, basically. So I needed some kind of way to render more quickly. And XPU was really promising and really great, but it didn't have subsurface scattering yet, and this had a lot of, you know, fleshy characters, and you know, it was still an alpha, so it wasn't like a great idea to use it. So I used Redshift for that, and it, you know, it was fine. But since then, I have kind of pivoted to using Karma, and it has been like the biggest, it's been the most changing a software has benefited my mental health in my entire life. It has been so great. So I'm going to show a little bit of this project that we did for Nike, which was this ad for these Jordan Tatum Jordan sneakers. And the concept behind the ad is basically, for anyone who doesn't follow basketball, there's this basketball player, Jason Tatum, who's playing for the Celtics right now, who's like, I guess, like the best basketball player right now. I don't really follow basketball that much, but anyway, so that's the core concept. The whole thing was done, though, again, in Houdini for the most part, and then rendered all in Karma using Karma XPU. So I'm just going to go ahead and play that, and there should be sound. Hopefully this will work.
Yo, Jason, did you always know? Did you always know?
Can I get that one?
Did you always know?
Yeah, I knew.
So it's a very silly concept of, did you always know you were going to be the best basketball player ever? And the CG team was very, very small for this project. It was basically my business partner, Cole, who's creating the assets. And then it was myself doing kind of all the other CG lighting, rendering, effects. And then most of the character animation being done by a team of my friend and former classmate, Miguel, and then he brought on two other really awesome animators, Sophie and Allah, who he works with. And they essentially did all the character animation in Maya, and then piped it over to me as FBXs. And then using KineFX, it was really, really awesome to be able to then very easily just like layer on extra tweaks or add extra bits of secondary motion or do all kinds of procedural edits to the animation. And there was a lot of stuff that we experimented with at certain points of like wanting to make it feel more stop motion-y. So I would like, use the time shift SOP to like do things like make it be animated on twos and then add like a little bit of jittering to the bones and stuff, which later ended up getting scrapped. But, the point is that this pipeline of bringing stuff in as FBXs to Houdini and then being able to then have the flexibility on my end to do all kinds of extra stuff was really, really awesome. And additionally, as I was saying, we use Solaris and we use Karma. And I wanted to talk a little about what I liked about that. So as you may have seen if you were at the last talk, there's a really awesome kind of multi-shot workflow that you can do with Solaris. Each of the different sequences in this, like with multiple shots, were all one individual Houdini file where we were able to very easily tweak the lighting and the make edits to the materials or things like that on a per shot basis if we wanted to. But mostly it gave like really nice control over tweaking the lighting. Lighting working with pre-cached out USD sequences was really, really nice and made it a lot smoother to work with than if we were just kind of rendering stuff live in the viewport in object level like you would pre-Solaris and Houdini. Also, I really like the way that they've developed these light tools in Solaris that I feel like doesn't get enough attention, where you can really kind of like paint with lights. Also, of course, switching renderers is great. I really like working with Karma CPU some of the time and then switching over to XPU when I want to do my final frames. They're not exactly the same, but being able to just really quickly preview something and get that quick time to first pixel that you do with a CPU renderer is really nice. So that's kind of what the interactivity, element is about. And also, I love being able to export out the entire scene as a USD sequence that is, all referencing other USD files that are being written out in the chain, and then rendering that with tops. And then, of course, just again, Karma, I have found to be such a joy to work with, and I'm really excited that hopefully soon XPU will be close to getting out of beta and people will start to try to adopt it more seriously for production. But yeah, and then what I like about Karma specifically, again, it's essentially two really great renderers. One is Karma XPU and the other one is Karma CPU. CPU is very flexible. You can do a lot with it. It's pretty similar to Mantra in a lot of ways, but it's a lot faster and more interactive, especially when you're working in Solaris. I like that it's built on all these different standards of USD, Material X, Optics, and Embry. They're not having to kind of rewrite anything completely from scratch necessarily. They're writing the whole engine from scratch, but they're at least building it on top of these sort of established libraries that are being kind of understood better. And it's also amazing that it's just built into Houdini, and I don't have to worry about installing a million different plugins on all my different computers anymore. It's also historically Houdini's really great at effects, and it's great at rendering things like volumes, and has lots of really cool features. Most of what I need, not as much as necessarily some of the other renderers that have been around for longer, particularly XPU, which is still in beta technically. But it also has some really fun, unique features. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of this the lens shaders that I've been just sort of playing with to like an absurd degree. Like I'm using them way too much in everything that I'm making, but it's a lot of fun, and I've gotten kind of like addicted to them. And even doing things like animating them, which is not something that you'd realistically have in a real camera, is just a fun way to get some kind of like trippy effects and stuff. Um, so yeah, that's this sort of other commercial project that I can talk about. But besides that, I also wanted to talk about doing personal projects, which is one of my main passions, and especially doing kind of little daily projects. Things like Side Effects has put on a couple fun competitions like Hulai and Mardini that they do every March. This other one that my friend set up called Blobtober I participated in and was really fun. But doing these daily projects I find to be a really fantastic creative outlet that just helps me kind of get something out, even if I'm swamped with other projects. You know, if I can find one day to just quickly put out something, it can kind of give me that creative fix that I need. It's quickly rewarding. It gives you the opportunity to learn and try a lot of new things. When there's a competition like Inktober or Blobtober or Mardini or whatever, I think a lot of people don't end up participating in them because everyone's busy and they have things to do in their lives, and they don't want to commit to doing a thing every single day for an entire month necessarily. I did that in Hulai 2020, and it was like the closest my girlfriend's come to wanting to break up with me. But it was a really, really good kind of boot camping experience where I improved really, really quickly. And so I would strongly urge people to try stuff like that. But even if you can't do an entire month, just try to do a couple days here and there, and it really is like tremendously rewarding. So you don't have to do them every day, but also it's a really great way to build momentum towards bigger projects. And I feel like I talk to a lot of friends who are interested in doing more personal projects, but one of the issues is that they have this idea for a big ambitious thing, but they don't necessarily like know how to start it, or they they want to start it, but they quickly kind of realize how much work it is relative to what they thought it was going to be, and people don't end up finishing them usually, or if they do, it doesn't turn out as good as they hoped. And so I feel like doing smaller projects and slowly building that momentum up to doing a bigger project is really the best way to achieve that goal in the long run, rather than just diving right into that big ambitious project. So Blobtober, as I was mentioning, was one that I did back in October, which is right after I finished this TV pilot project that I mentioned. And as you can see, it's just a list of prompts that one of my friends came up with, and a handful of us kind of participated in it together. So I just jumped in and I did a couple of them. On day 5 was the first one that I jumped into. And this is also the first time that I really started using Karma to make my own stuff and like figuring that side of it out. So I made this one for number 5, which was weather. I made this fun little cloud guy. And I know that the noise is swimming on this guy, but I kind of like the look of it, and so I just left it that way. And also, it's a daily, so I'm trying to get it out really, really fast. So that was a fun little one with Karma. And then this next one I did was Thirsty. And for this one, I played a bunch with the Karma XPU lens shaders for the first time, as you'll see in a sec. But also like did some really weird stuff, like having this weird kind of like vellum sim that happened pre-bone deformation with all of the weights of the character on it, and then I animated the character afterwards just to try a weird new workflow that I hadn't done before. This day's theme was Blueberry Robber, so I made this fun little guy, which I got to do some Karma hair shader stuff with for the first time, and so that was a fun one as well. But yeah, then I wanted to get a little bit more ambitious. So I hit up some friends that I've been wanting to collab with for a long time. This really awesome duo in the Netherlands called Yonk. And they do lots of really awesome VR sculpting stuff, as you can see. on the left, and they're kind of known for that style. And so we were deciding like, let's do one of these as a collab together. We'll maybe spend more than a day on it. And so we picked day 19, which was what can I do to get you behind the wheel of a new Honda today? So we were like, okay, what could we do here? And I had a couple of ideas that I was inspired by from TikTok, believe it or not. So I saw this really silly TikTok trend where people were making these videos with this audio that I'll play real quick so you'll get the sense. So anyway, that was the audio, and I was like, I feel like it would be fun to do something where the car's salesman is like trying to really aggressively sell the car, maybe, and then we pivot into something silly, and we'll figure that out later. And then I also saw this really awesome used car ad on TikTok, and I really liked the incredibly bizarre, cheap like animation style of it.
Someone said there was a better deal than Carp Kia in Rockville Center.
I doubt it. Well, we have to at least check.
Hey there, fella, what about this price?
It's not here.
Save more with
So anyway,
us.
you get the idea. But yeah, it's like very stepped animation, and I wanted to try to kind of maybe do something like that. So we decided to make this, and we decided to do it and like live stream the whole thing. So we hopped into Medium, which is the app that we mainly use for sculpting, and streamed ourselves both kind of working in the same 3D space with Medium, which is a super fun feature of that program. And I use it a lot for making my characters that I do in Houdini. I'll like sculpt them first in Medium and then bring them over. And it's cool. You can see like, in this example, like I'm just kind of chilling in the back here while Vicky is over here sculpting this guy. Yeah, so we did that. And then I separately went and streamed kind of the entire process of myself just like playing around with the character that we ended up with, this car salesman guy, doing lots of weird kind of KineFX experiments. I did this all on the stream, and it's all still like on my YouTube channel if anyone's curious to check that out at all. But yeah, I got this fun kind of like animation. I did this weird stuff also with using like rotational noise to drive the bone animation, so it's all this weird kind of procedural, dancing, screwed up car salesman guy. But yeah, and then this is the final result that we ended up with. So that was a ton of fun, and decided to like then go, of course, and post it on TikTok, and it like blew up like crazy. It got like almost like I think like 8 million views between both of us posting it on our own TikTok pages. And I later decided to go and make kind of a little tutorial breaking down more of these kind of like rigging tricks that I used more succinctly, which is on my YouTube channel, and you can check it out. All the links to my stuff also are on my website, Christopher's website. Yeah, so that was like, a little bit more of an ambitious project that, I decided to tackle, building off of those daily projects. But I wanted to get even more ambitious, and rather than working, for like, I think like 2 or 3 days on this project, make something that would maybe take like a week or something, and just do it on my own also. And so I started, working on this project with all these weird little characters that I made, including like this kind of bird character. And you'll see with the audio in a sec, but I actually originally started by just making like kind of an audio sketch in Ableton where I had some, sort of background music that I liked, and then kind of made different kind of like talking sounds with a sampler that would just like play with like an arpeggiator, like picking different sort of notes. And it gave this kind of like Banjo-Kazooie-esque sort of voice effect. And I used that to sort of, I picked like a bird sound for one of them. And then in my head, I just sort of like used that to come up with this weird bird box character. And did the same with the other ones. And then there's one other character that actually speaks, who you'll see in a sec. But this was the final result from that.
Man, I spent hours of my life stomping Koopas.
So I used this weird like Chris Pratt clip of him talking about being in the Mario movie, and made this weird Chris Pratt Mario character that I sculpted in Medium also, and then brought over. But yeah, this was another really fun one that also ended up like kind of blowing up on TikTok on its own later as well. Which was cool because it was like a totally original thing that didn't come from some other sound. It was like my own thing completely, and I was like super proud of this. And I was like, okay, this is like almost enough to be like a short film that I might send to a festival as like a small short film. So I feel like this is kind of like all building up more momentum to want to do like an even more ambitious project. And so again, the Blobtober pieces took me 1 day each, and this Yonk project was like a 3-day project. This last one that I called Goober Talk took like about a week. So I have this next project that I, am gonna hopefully do soon. I'm not gonna talk about it in this presentation, but hopefully next year at Annecy maybe we'll get to see something. But yeah, I feel very passionate about this sort of building up momentum to more ambitious projects, with doing like a daily and then like a multi-day project and then like a week-long project and then maybe like a month-long project, and then that'll give you hopefully like sort of the momentum and kind of confidence and understanding of the process and enough learning experience that you need to like make something a little bit more ambitious. But also in addition to that, I did a few more little dailies when I had the chance this past March for Mardini, which again I would strongly encourage everyone to participate in. I feel like even if you don't know any Houdini, this is like such a great way to just jump in and try to make something and get involved with like a whole big community of people all trying to make stuff. So I jumped in on, I forget which day it was, but one of the themes was light bulb. And this was like, I don't know, maybe like day 19 or 20 or something. And so I made this fun little light bulb character that was all just done with KineFX, and got to include some of the like awesome spark trails tools that were added to Houdini like a few versions ago, and also just like did tons of my sort of classic workflow of like animating a very basic amount, and then layering on secondary effects and jiggle and the secondary motion sop in Houdini, and then like actual effects like the particle sim and the spark trail and stuff. And I was super happy with how this guy came out. And as you can see, there's lots of like lens distortion also, because I can't stop using the Karma lens shader effects. So that was a fun one. And then another one I did was I started it on the day where the theme was run, but I ended up finishing it on the day where the theme was shadow. So I kind of incorporated both ideas. But I made this really weird thing. And I went for kind of like a different style than I normally would. Like this was kind of a weird sort of retro-y looking thing. This was actually inspired by this really awesome talk that Mark Fancher did he's an awesome Houdini artist, makes really great tutorials also. But he did this sort of setup where he was lighting things and rendering things kind of, but doing it all in sops, where he had like kind of all these points that were let me see if I have here we go. The video of kind of a little bit of the breakdown of, what my setup looked like. But I'm rendering this all just in the viewport. Like I'm not, really using Karma or anything like that. and just using kind of like old school tricks with dot products and things like that to kind of create my own custom viewport shader. I did a little bit of post processing even with the compositing context in Houdini called Cops. But it was a really, really fun, weird little experiment that, made me want to try to do some more stuff like that, hopefully at some point. But yeah, and here's another example of that with my character Nabi, who you'll see kind of repeating throughout this presentation and throughout my work. But yeah, it's super cool that Houdini is flexible enough to kind of allow for building these kinds of weird like renderers inside the viewport. And in addition to that, it was like really fast and performant. Like I was able to even like animate with KineFX and like deform the bones and things like that, and have it all update all these points that were all being projected onto this mesh, all like in pretty close to real time. Like it was fast enough that I could actually work with it, and it wasn't like really, really cumbersome to use. So yeah, like as you can see, I have the mesh, and then it's like all points that are being shot down from this one location on a grid that are like evenly spaced to create this cool dot effect. And then based on the luminance, it's sort of controlling like the size of the particles as well as the brightness of the particles. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, it was a really fun little project. And I should mention also this, I have like a detailed kind of breakdown of on my YouTube page as well. And the light bulb one, I also did a really fun stream with Peter Arcara back there, who does this Houdini Hangout series of streams. And so you can see more about either of those online if you're curious. But yeah, so got a couple other quick things before I wrap up. Houdini on the go. So I just want to show you this render that I made over the holidays last year when I was staying at my girlfriend's parents' house. I didn't have access to my giant computer. And I was able to amazingly make this entire thing, including the sims and everything, and do the look dev and lighting and rendering all entirely on this little MacBook Air M1 using the Apple Silicon build of Houdini. The only thing I didn't do was I didn't do my final render on it. Like I let the sequence render remotely on my computers back at home. But just the fact that I was able to so easily like do the lighting and do the look dev and get live updates and do the sims and everything on this little, MacBook was just kind of mind blowing. It made me sort of think like, why do I even have these super expensive, Windows PCs? But of course, like there's plenty of scenarios where you need like a lot more RAM or a lot more power. But still, I feel like a lot of people are under the impression that you need like a really powerful computer to run Houdini. And that's definitely not the case in my experience. So yeah, and then I have a few more quick little things. Coming up with effects ideas. So I made this fun little like flip fluids tutorial. I love flip fluids. I use it a ton. I talked about this in my talk last year of how I love to use it for abstract things like face melting and other like weird stuff like that. I just think it's a really fun solver that just gives you such cool looks just by the nature of the way that it works. And so I decided to make like a little flip fluid tutorial that is on my Patreon and I'm going to put on my YouTube later. But I had a lot of fun with that. And then I ended up just as a result of that, creating this weird kind of fluid effect. And then I had this idea of what if I did this, but on a certain frame, it switched over just to being like a vellum simulation. So I did that here, and you can see it's kind of cool. Just like on a certain frame, it's going from being a flip simulation with all the particles that's being remeshed every frame to being like a tetrahedral soft body vellum simulation. And I thought this was really cool, but I was also getting different cool results depending on whether I switched it from flip to vellum on frame, 25 or frame 30 or frame 35. So I was thinking, like what frame should be the one that I switch it on? And then I decided, why not all of them? And that is where I'm going to talk about tops for a second, which is this really cool and, in my opinion, very underutilized recent context in Houdini that is absolutely incredible, particularly for this thing called wedging, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. But basically, what it let me do was, look at this setup in particular and say, okay, I want to wedge out a simulation where this is happening, on frame 25 and frame 26 and frame 27, all the way up to frame 50. And it'll show sort of like here, kind of how that's set up. It's very simple where, again, I have my flip particle set up here. And then you can see that's getting meshed. And then there's this switch frame that I have where the change is occurring. And on that frame, this time shift is sort of linked to that switch frame. And then it's being turned into a tetrahedral soft body. And then it's transferring over the velocity and the rest attribute. And then it's simulating that. And then the switch down here at the bottom is actually switching between, what's being displayed. And so, I have that basic setup. And then all I have to do in Tops is basically, you can see it's playing through here. Dive into the top net, I think. Sorry, I'm waiting for my former self to catch up to what I'm talking about. But yeah, I dive into Tops here. And then in the wedge, I just say, I make this attribute called switch frame. And then I give it this range of 25 to 50 or 26 to 50. And then I can just basically wedge out those 25, wedges. And then that goes into a ROP fetch that is looking at the Karma render node and rendering out all of these. And also a file cache where it's caching out all these before that. And then it's also able to export out all of the MP4s of all these sequences and things so that I can wake up in the morning and then have all these really cool things to look at. And then so the final result of that was both all these individual renders, but I was also able to take all these different geocaches and render them out in this cool way where they're all kind of cascading down on a per frame basis. And it creates this really crazy effect that I was really excited about. And then you can see all these different little wedges of it kind of flipping on different frames. But it's kind of this cool idea where it's it's sort of changing every other or every frame is each of these different versions that it plays in the beginning. It's like a parallel universe where a decision was made differently, and then they were all kind of merged together at a slightly different time to create this cool cascading effect. So then going even crazier from that, I thought, well, what if I use this sort of wedging idea to generate characters from scratch with rigs and bones and, vellum simulations. And I made this really fun character generator that can just generate infinite of these characters for me now that all have hair and they're all jiggly and they're dancing and they're doing, this IK stuff with their legs. And I could export them all as FBXs or GLTFs or USD files or whatever too, all with Tops. And it's just a really, really powerful, super fun tool that I am really excited to mess with more and excited to keep working on this character generator and adding more, things like noses and mouths and, other shapes and, colors and textures and things like that. Yeah, those are sort of some of my fun explorations with Tops and characters and all that stuff in Houdini. So yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for some questions. Cool.
Oh, so cool. So cool. Questions? Yeah.
One question about Redshift. What was the difference in rendering times between Redshift and Karma?
Yeah, that's a good question. The main issue for me and the reason that I switched wasn't necessarily the rendering times. Now, of course, like Karma's CPU being a CPU renderer isn't going to render nearly as fast as Redshift, which is purely a GPU renderer. But XPU I've found to be very similar. In some cases, a little bit slower. In some cases, a little bit faster. It really just depends on what I'm doing exactly. But ultimately, for me, the frustration that I hit with Redshift was that it had all these weird driver issues last year that I think are maybe being sorted out now, which was just ended up being kind of a nightmare with me trying to get all my computers to render this pilot. But also, I found that like a GPU renderer doesn't have that time to first pixel that a CPU renderer is going to have, or a hybrid, CPU and GPU renderer like Karma XPU is going to have. So I switched over and I was like, oh my God, I'm getting instant feedback on my scenes. Whereas before it was taking, 30 to 60 seconds for big scenes, sometimes even longer, to even just get like pixels to show up so I could see what my lighting looked like in Redshift. So just having, Karma and building the materials in Material X and being able to have the flexibility to like change renderers or even just switch between Karma CPU and XPU has just made my life working in lighting. It's gone from like lighting being like, this sort of like painful process to being like really a joyful process where it's just really, really fun to work with, setting up lights and stuff. And I think also, I forgot to mention, but earlier back in the presentation when I was showing the stuff with the basketball, the shoe commercial for Nike, I think, this is actually a video that I forgot to play. But as you can see, like here is where I'm playing with sort of the lighting tools in Solaris. And you can do all kinds of crazy things, like pick a point where you want to have a shadow come from and where you want the shadow to land. And, this all works in any renderer in Solaris. But again, having the time to first pixel that you do with the CPU renderer makes it just so much nicer to work with, especially when you have like a beefy CPU like a Threadripper or something like that, which I have. So I was like, I was much happier being able to at least work with just CPU if I wanted to. And then, also like if ever I wanted to do something that was a little bit more, that was a feature that I couldn't do on GPU renderer or XPU or Redshift or whatever. I always have the option to do something with CPU if I really want to in a pinch. I know it's going to take a lot longer to render. But yeah, that's kind of the main reasons, if that makes sense, for why I switched over. In terms of speed, it's like it's just going to be, on a scene by scene basis type thing.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hello. What do you want to see for Houdini 20? Like new stuff or improvement?
Oh man. I mean, to be honest, I feel like I'm really happy with where Houdini's at, and like there's not a lot of like major pain points for me right now. I think Houdini 20, I can't say too much, but I do hope that they have that finally Karma XPU maybe will come out of beta, which I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And then I know that they've been teasing a little bit of there's going to be some updates to character rigging and stuff, which I'm really excited to see what they do with. And I know that KineFX, one of the choke points is that if you have a lot of characters, it can get kind of slow, which was something that we struggled with a bit in this spot and in the TV pilot. But the trade-off was kind of worth it for having all the extra flexibility that Houdini and KineFX has to offer. Yeah, I also hope at some point that Cops gets an update and runs faster, but I am not anticipating that will happen for Houdini 20. But hopefully later down the line.
And if you're interested in Houdini 20 and interested in feathers, Kai Stavginsky did a preview of the feather system at the FMX session this past April, and it's on our YouTube channel if you want to have a look.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Really excited to play with that.
Yeah. Other questions? I think we have time for maybe one more. And if not, then thank you very much, Chris.